Welcome to Realtor Real's NAR Settlement series, where we will be covering different aspects of the NAR settlement, how it will affect the real estate industry, and terms and concepts that have come into focus as a result of the settlement.
So the main relationship, the one that almost all agents love, is agency. That means I have a listing agreement with the seller and I have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller, or I have a buyer's agency agreement with the buyer and I have a fiduciary responsibility to the buyer. The reason we love this is this gives us the best opportunity to assist our buyers or sellers in the most impactful way. So as your agent, for example, I can pull comps for you, and I can also tell you what those comps mean and how they might affect you as either a buyer or a seller. I can help you fill out a contract, for example, and I can advise you on the best way to fill out the contract to try to attain your goals. I can advise you on strategies inside that contract to try to get you what you want or to save you money on a house. There's all different ways that my job comes into focus with an agency agreement where I'm able to offer the maximum value to my clients. And that's why most agents love it. We have a fiduciary responsibility to that client, and it's where we really get to shine. The next type of relationship is one that I would say most agents don't love, even though there can be more money in it for agent or for transaction broker, and that's what it's called, is transaction broker. But the issue with transaction broker is that usually you wind up in transaction broker because you have a listing agreement with one seller and you have a buyer's agency agreement with another buyer, and those two people come together and decide that they want to do business together. And you can kind of see where this is going, hopefully, but if you have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller and you have a fiduciary responsibility to the buyer, how can you possibly negotiate or help that either party negotiate on behalf of themselves? The answer is you can't. That would be called dual agency, and it is very illegal in Colorado. So what you find yourself in is called a transaction broker relationship, and our contracts are designed to move into that if we need to. The problem with transaction broker for me personally that I have found is that you can no longer advise either party. You're now in a position where you're acting more like a referee. You can help fill out paperwork. You can help keep the transaction moving along. You can facilitate negotiations by helping the parties communicate with each other. But what you can't do is advise either party against the other one. And where this becomes a problem for me personally is that, I usually am in a position of trust with my buyers and sellers before I end up in transaction broker, meaning I've been advising them all along, and now all of a sudden we find ourselves in a position where I can no longer advise either one. Well, for me personally, I'd much rather have repeat business and referral business at the end of the transaction than make a few extra dollars. And it's really hard when you've been advising people and they've come to trust you throughout the course of a transaction or through the course of your relationship, and you all of a sudden have to take a huge step back and say, hey, I can no longer give you advice. Now, that doesn't mean that the buyer and seller won't find themselves in a position where they find a mutually acceptable path forward and both parties get what they want and both parties are happy at the end, but it does create a lot more circumstances where things could get off on the wrong foot. You could, buyers and sellers through no fault of their own could start questioning your credibility. I mean, after all, you were helping them as an agent, and now all of a sudden you're not giving them the advice that they had come to rely on. The third type of relationship I can have with somebody is a customer relationship, and it's not really much of a relationship at all. Similar to the court of law, citizens of the United States have always had a right to represent themselves in the court of law and save themselves money on lawyer fees. Buyers and sellers have always had a right to represent themselves in real estate transactions and save on broker fees. Now, how does this look to an agent? How does this relationship form? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say I have a listing and I have an agency agreement with that seller. How I find myself in a customer relationship with the buyer is that customer approaches me, the agent, and says, I want to buy your listing, and I need you to help me with that. And I, as an agent, have a fiduciary responsibility to that seller to help them get a contract on their house. So that might mean I have to perform certain basic rudimentary tasks for the buyer to help them get an offer submitted on my listing. And when I say basic rudimentary tasks, what could that look like? For example, I can help them fill out a contract to buy and sell to purchase said listing, But when I say help them fill it out, I really am only filling it out the way they asked me to fill it out. I can't give them any advice at all. And this is a 17-page plus legal document. So there's a lot that goes into this legal document, and there's a lot to understand when you're filling it out. And that brings me to the first reason. I'm going to give you 3 basic reasons without going into too much detail as to why you don't see a lot of buyers representing themselves in real estate transactions in Colorado. The number 1 reason is that you are filling out a legal document. It is legally binding in the court of law, and buyers may find themselves in a position where they've actually taken on a lot more liability than they want to take on in a transaction by representing themselves. Another reason, and maybe even more costly reason why buyers don't represent themselves a lot in Colorado, is it's very easy for buyers or sellers that are unrepresented to really underestimate or overestimate the value of the property they're interested in or that they're selling, right? And when I say overestimate or underestimate, I mean they could be underestimating or overestimating by tens of thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes. We actually see this fairly regularly in Colorado with for sale by owners. A third reason why people might want to reconsider representing themselves in a transaction, or why most buyers probably don't try to represent themselves in the transaction, is that they might find themselves at a severe disadvantage negotiating a real estate transaction with an experienced broker. And what I mean is, unless you negotiate professionally for a living, and specifically real estate transactions for a living, you may be at a disadvantage when it comes time to negotiate with somebody that does negotiate real estate transactions for a living, potentially costing you tens of thousands of dollars there as well. And the reason being is that, the seller's agent still has a fiduciary responsibility to the seller. They have no fiduciary responsibility, and they have very minimal responsibility to the buyer in this example. And so they're going to have to go hard to work for that seller to try to save them as much money on negotiations, make sure that that seller is making as much money as they possibly can on the transaction. And so potentially there is potential there for a buyer to be railroaded a little bit, because they just don't do it for a living, and they got their eye on the prize. They think, oh, I'm saving a lot of money on real estate transactions, which may or may not be true, and it's okay if I eat it a little bit on this negotiation, a little bit on that negotiation. Before you know it, you've lost everything you've gained by saving yourself some money on broker fees. So thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe, and have a great day.